Thank you, everybody, so much for joining this program. I'm really, really excited to have this opportunity to talk about the Heart Sutra with you all and also to hear from you as well. Some of you know me pretty well already, and some of you not so much yet. I am someone who really enjoys conversation. And I really enjoy conversation and having like a nice back and forth. I feel like we integrate knowledge better when we participate in producing it. And that for me happens when we have a chance to share our own thoughts and try to share our own ways of articulating things. And so what I will ask is, as we go, so I guess I don't need to be admitting people. This is my habit. I will back up a moment and introduce myself a little bit more for those of you who don't know me. Um, I have my day job is as a university professor, and I have the tremendous privilege of teaching Tibetan and Indian Buddhism here in Montreal at McGill University in the School of Religious Studies, and I love it. I love what I get to do for a living. It does also um, mean that when I'm doing stuff like teaching on Zoom, sometimes I'll, like admitting people to the meeting kind of automatically comes because of my pandemic experience of teaching like this. So I'm trying to just relax into um, having Danielle helping me out. And thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you so much, Travanya, and everybody for inviting me to teach and for welcoming me and joining me here. So yeah, as I was saying, my day job is as a university professor, and I also, hey everybody, I also have a very, very important and enriching part of my life is with my practice community, which includes the Bodhi Path community and the Dharmakaya community and uh, the Kibi community, the Rangjung Yeshe community around Chukinima Rinpoche. I have enjoyed practice spaces and learning spaces and combining them in places like, especially at Kibi, where I worked for a few years, and at the Rangjung Yeshe Institute in Kathmandu. These are all places that have worked really nicely to integrate an academic model of teaching and learning with a monastic model of teaching and learning. And it has been really great for me in my particular way of learning and studying and being with the Dharma, to be able to combine these different types of knowledge. And so what I'm going to be doing today is embracing all of these different ways of knowing. And so some of the things that I may be sharing with you about, or that I will be sharing with you about origins of the Heart Sutra, origins of Mahayana Sutras, may be familiar to some of you, may be challenging to some of you. All voices are welcome, and I'm not asking anybody to just believe what I say because I say it. So if something is really challenging or difficult for you, that's fine, and that's welcome here. That's part of learning, is us challenging each other. Okay. So that being said, I really like participation. But I can get distracted pretty easily and get knocked off my train of thought pretty easily. So when you have questions, please use, if you know how to use the raise hand function, that's a really useful thing to have going. Otherwise, you can literally just raise your hand, and then I will get to you just as soon as I finish whatever thought I am trying to finish. Otherwise, if people just kind of chime in as the questions come up, I can get really distracted and forget what I was talking about, which is fine. Rabbit holes are fun to go down, but you know, in the grand scheme of things with the Heart Sutra, having a total of 90 minutes today and 90 minutes tomorrow is not a ton of time, no matter how short this text is. We could easily we could spend a month on it and not exhaust the incredible depth of this text. So there is stuff I will be trying to get through. Okay. Today we'll be focusing more on, I think, more on the ritual side of things, tomorrow more on the philosophical side of things, but they are inevitably going to be blending into each other quite a lot. And before we start with the actual substance of the teachings and reading the text together, I would like for us to start by reciting refuge and the four immeasurables, which have been posted in the chat. Can everybody see them in the chat? No? Okay, so we'll recite the refuge 3 times and then the four immeasurables once. Okay. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sublime Assembly, I take refuge for as long as I have not accomplished the enlightened state. May I, due to the merit of practicing the 6 paramitas, such as generosity, accomplish enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sublime Assembly, I take refuge for as long as I have not accomplished the enlightened state. May I, due to the merit of practicing the 6 paramitas, such as generosity, accomplish enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sublime Assembly, I take refuge for as long as I have not accomplished the enlightened state. May I, due to the merit of practicing the 6 paramitas, such as generosity, accomplish enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the root of suffering. May they not be separated from the great happiness devoid of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free from passion, aggression, and prejudice. Thank you. Any questions before we get started? Okay. Let's start then by reciting the Heart Sutra, the version of it that, oh boy, I have so many windows open on my computer here. Okay. Let's start by reciting the Heart Sutra together. The version that was circulated in advance of the program. Thus did I hear. At one time, the Bhagavan was abiding at Vulture Peak in Rajagriha with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan entered into a samadhi on the categories of phenomena called perception of the profound. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara, beheld the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and saw that those 5 aggregates are also empty of intrinsic existence. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara. How should a son of good lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom train? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara, said this to the venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, a son of good lineage or a daughter of good lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should perceive things in this way. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, conditioning factors, and consciousnesses are empty. Therefore, Shariputra, all phenomena are empty, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not stainless, undiminished, unfilled. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no conditioning factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomenon, no I constituent up to and including no mental consciousness constituent, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, no aging and death up to and including no extinction of aging and death. In the same way, no suffering, origin, cessation, path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Because their minds are without obstruction, they have no fear. They pass completely beyond error and go to the fulfillment of nirvana. All the Buddhas who abide in the three times have fully awakened into unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment, independence on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that completely pacifies all suffering. Because it is not false, it should be known to be true. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is stated thus: Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, a bodhisattva, mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom in that way. Then the Bhagavan arose from samadhi and said, well done to the bodhisattva, the mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara. Well done, child of good lineage. It is like that. It is like that. The practice of the profound perfection of wisdom is just as you have taught it. Even the Tathagatas admire it. The Bhagavan, having so spoken, the venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara, and all those surrounding, and the entire world, the gods, humans, demigods, and Gandharvas, admired and praised the speech of the Bhagavan. Okay. So, why do we recite the Heart Sutra? You may very reasonably want to ask. Our connection to texts is something that is really formed culturally it's in a specific cultural context. It's in a specific moment in history. And this is something that we all share. I mean, looking, I want to say around the room, around the Zoom room, at all your faces in these tiny squares, we clearly don't all come from the same place, and we don't all have the same first language or first languages. But what we do share is our setting, broadly speaking, in let's say late capitalist, post-Christian, secular-ish kind of a cultural setting where we all are people who find ourselves with the time and the energy and the inclination to come together on a weekend um, and think about something to do with the Buddha Dharma. And so we have more in common than what separates us. And I, though I don't know everybody's history with the type of education that you've all had, I think it may be safe to say, though tell me if I'm wrong, um, most, if not all of us here, are probably accustomed to relating to texts as a kind of like a vessel that holds knowledge or information of some kind, and that reading is a practice that most of us have been taught to do quietly. As children, we're taught to read out loud. We say the letters of the alphabet. We sound out words, and that's something that's considered to be in the beginning stages of learning how to read. And then when we're able to read quietly, read silently, that's like a sign of our mastery of reading. And then from that point onwards, reading becomes a really private undertaking. It's something we do quietly. We sit in libraries and uh, I mean, the thought of being in a library for me is also the thought of being in a quiet space, no matter how many people are around. There's something about the way we relate to books that makes us want to go quiet and engage individually with a text. Now, the cultural context and the way of relating to texts um, at the time that these early Buddhist texts are produced is very different. It is a setting where things are spoken, things are heard, things are memorized. Where, I mean, just to give you some sense, that from the time in the time that the Buddha lived, which is approximately 2,500 years ago, writing was there was no writing in South Asia. People were not writing. Doesn't mean that, I mean, we tend to think we associate literacy or relationships with texts, we associate that with writing, of course. But when we start thinking about how oral cultures have functioned, and we think maybe a little bit more expansively about what constitutes a text, we can permit ourselves to think about literacy and the way that texts are created and transmitted and preserved is different in different times and places. And so Buddha certainly did deliver teachings in a systematic way. And those teachings were recorded and preserved in a systematic way. They were transmitted generation after generation in a systematic way, but without the support of physical texts, without the support of writing. It was all done orally. And the way, for example, of confirming that everybody, let's say, was all on the same page with the Heart Sutra would be that we all get together and we recite it together and we make sure everybody is reciting the same thing in the same order. And that's how we know that we're preserving the text. And the move from orality to text is something that happened many hundreds of years after the death of the Buddha, 400-500 years approximately. And that seems to have happened largely as a result of a mix of natural disasters and human disasters. So epidemics, tsunamis, war, all of these kinds of things that can wipe out human populations. If the human population is what is preserving a text, and suddenly the human population is in a really precarious situation, then one may resort to writing. But it was really like it was a backup plan at the time. It was understood to be nowhere near as trustworthy as the human memory. which is so different from the way I relate to my own human memory. I think of my capacity to remember things is very, very limited, and I always refer back to texts. And I think that this is something that a lot of us share, as we rely on texts um, as these vessels that keep things in a more pure and unchanged state. And so that's a very different way of relating to texts from when all of this was first written down. Um, all of the Buddhist sutras were initially meant to be recited and meant to be heard. This is how we were supposed to encounter them. And so the sound of it, the carrying of it on the breath, the need for community for a text to be transmitted is an important part of how Buddhists have related to texts throughout time. You know, any one of us could access a Buddhist sutra in a library. That wasn't the case 2,000 years ago. You needed community. You needed people um, to speak it to you. And so you know, in a Tibetan context, when we receive something like a lung of a text, this ritual permission to read or study or practice a text, this is the human connection, the community connection. This is uh, I mean, there are many layers of meaning to it, but one of them is certainly connecting us to the living Buddhist community, to that continuity of people who have practiced and studied these texts for the last couple of thousand years. So it's a very reciting a sutra is a very powerful practice for a lot of reasons. Um, Sorry for my wobbly camera here. Um, so yes, these are all meant to be recited and heard, and this is also can signal for us what's important about the opening line of all the sutras and suttas that we read. Thus have I heard, right? Evam maya shrutam, thus have I heard. This is signaling to us that it's not thus did I read, not thus did the library book say. It's not like that. It's about hearing. It's about um, uh, it's the reassurance from within the text that somebody was with Buddha when this text was uttered, when this teaching was uttered. It is connecting us to the first community that heard it, and it is connecting us to a different way of relating to texts than our shared cultural habit in this time and place. When we recite the Heart Sutra then, or listen to the Heart Sutra, another way that we have been generally trained to relate to texts is to read them for meaning, right? Like we read textbooks for information, we read novels for or poetry, let's say, for the aesthetic experience, or sometimes for a great story. We read philosophy to understand a different way of thinking. Maybe there are all kinds of ways that we can relate to texts, looking for some kind of meaning in the words. But that is not the only way of relating to a text. And in the context of the Heart Sutra, that comes very much to the foreground. Hearing the Heart Sutra, reciting the Heart Sutra, copying the Heart Sutra, all of these are practices that are undertaken for protection, for purification, to accumulate merit. The Heart Sutra and other perfection of wisdom sutras are venerated as embodiments of Buddha's wisdom. Without necessarily going into like a line by line explanation. And this is one of the habits that many of us bring to texts like sutras, and what makes something like the Heart Sutra so confounding and challenging is that we want to be able to read it and understand it. We see a title like Perfection of Wisdom, we think, oh, wisdom, that's got to mean it's something to do with the intellect. And so if I read this text, my intellect will be sharpened. I'm going to get some perfect understanding. Then we read it and we're more confused than we've ever been in our lives sometimes, to the extent of even having nightmares about it, as in my case. But the power of the words, the way that it functions is, for a lot of people who practice the Heart Sutra, and this is a text that is recited daily in practice communities in the Tibetan context, in a Korean context, in a Chinese context, in a Japanese context. It is a very pervasively practiced text. But that practice is not mostly reading it as though it is a philosophical treatise. It's not to say that people don't, but most people practicing it are not relating to it that way. When we recite it, we are opening a space for the generation of virtue, for purifying negative, negative deeds, the accumulation of negative deeds, and for protection. Exactly how it functions as protection is something that I cannot explain to you because I don't get it. At the same time, I have trust in it. And we see all kinds of examples of this. I'll give you an example from my own life. One time, I was going to see Shama Rinpoche at the Bodhipath Center in Virginia. And a few of us were all landing at the DC airport at around the same time. And then we had rented a car. We were going to drive. It's about a 4-hour drive from DC out to the Center and Natural Bridge. And it was an extremely rainy, dark, stormy night. And it was a very difficult drive that took a lot longer than usual. And when we all arrived at the center, Shama Rinpoche, welcomed us into the house and said, "Okay, I'll go and tell the lamas they can stop reciting the Heart Sutra now. I've had them continuously reciting the Heart Sutra since you guys landed." This, like first of all, this says everything about the kindness of the teachers, that this is they know the efforts that we make to see them and be with them, and the way that someone like Shama Rinpoche acts to protect the people who are coming to him is through reciting the Heart Sutra. Okay, that confidence is there. We have so the recitation, there's also, some of you have probably heard of the very, very important Chinese monk named Xuanzang. Yeah, okay. One or two nods. So Xuanzang lived in the, here's me and my terrible memory. What century did he live in? Does somebody want to time in? I think it's like 7th century.
In the Tang Dynasty, anyway.
Tang Dynasty, in the first half of the 7th century. Thank you. Yeah. And so he very famously made this incredible journey on foot from China to India to go and collect scriptures to bring back to China with him. And the story of this pilgrimage has become the source of an incredibly vast amount of extraordinary literature and practices in all over East Asia. Anyways, the point of this is there is a moment in his story where he is crossing the desert. I believe he's crossing the Gobi Desert, and he is attacked by demons. And we can take that literally or metaphorically, however we wish to. Just picture yourself in the middle of the night in a vast desert on foot, carrying lots of Buddhist texts, and you hear all kinds of howling around you, be it wind or demons. And he survived this journey by reciting the Heart Sutra. Okay. This is how he tells his story. And he is also really important for the introduction of the Heart Sutra. In particular, his translation of it is very, very important in the East Asian Buddhist context. We also find the Heart Sutra, either the whole sutra or just the mantra, which we'll talk more about, is used as a protective amulet, right? It can be, hang on, I'm going to share something with you here. So yeah, you can see here, these are two kind of protective images. This one is written in Devanagari, the alphabet often used for Sanskrit. And this one is written in Tibetan. And it is the mantra with Om in the center in this one, and then the mantra written around it in the petals of a lotus. And these are the kinds of images that people may, you could have it printed and hung on a wall. You could have it literally stamped onto like an amulet and worn on your belt or on like a belt loop or something like that. This just physically keeping the text of the Heart Sutra on you. It could be like an amulet around the neck, could be on a ring, is understood to be a protective, to have a kind of protective force. Now, copying the Heart Sutra is also understood to be a protective, very protective activity. You can see this slide, yeah, of this man with the sutra written on half his face. On his forehead is the Om. So this is a still from a film called Kwaidan. It is it's kind of a horror movie, but it's one of the chapters in it. It's a film that has like a few different chapters in it, and it's 1 hour long. If we had done this program in person, we would have watched this together one evening. But this is a still from the story of a monk named Hoichi, who was a brilliant musician and singer, and but he was blind, which becomes important because he was being invited to come and sing the epic story of a royal family, the end of a particular royal dynasty. And he was going with the person who had invited him and playing it every night. And he just thought he was being invited to play this music, but the monks in the monastery saw that his complexion was getting like very ashy white, and he was losing weight, and he wasn't doing well. And so someone followed him one night, and while Hoichi thought he was playing for an aristocratic assembly, he was actually sitting alone in a graveyard, and he was playing for ghosts. So the abbot of the monastery is consulted on how to protect Hoichi from these ghosts before they kill him, by robbing him of all of his energy. And the abbot says we must write the Heart Sutra all over his body. It will make him invisible to ghosts. So it's not studying the Heart Sutra. It's not understanding emptiness. It's, in this case, not even reciting it. It's just having the writing on his body makes him invisible to the ghosts. And so yeah, it's very worthwhile seeing. It's quite beautiful the way they write it on him. You can see they're writing it even on his eyelids and everything. Notable here is his ear, which has no writing on it, and they forget to write it on his ears, and this leads to some quite gory and terrible drama in the in the story, which in case you end up watching it, I won't tell you about it, but um, yeah, it's quite intense. So all that is to say, wherever the Heart Sutra is practiced, it's put to all different kinds of uses that are maybe not the expected uses that we generally have for texts. Copying it, as you can see, I mean, here on Hoichi's body, but copying the Heart Sutra is something that people will go and do as a kind of practice. In a contemporary setting, people will go, not so much in North America, but in places like China, for example, somebody might go to a monastery, and instead of doing something like you know, undertaking some kind of seated, quiet meditation, they may undertake sitting down and copying out the Heart Sutra, right? As a practice for generating merit, for calming and centering the mind. It's a really important practice, copying sutras in general and the Heart Sutra in particular. Any questions about this before I continue? I want to talk a little bit about Sanskrit. Okay, because Sanskrit is, I mean, a fabulous language and a complicated language, but learnable. And it's also a language that is associated with orality much more than being written. It is, okay. The Heart Sutra has been translated into all kinds of languages. But something that does not get translated is the mantra, which raises the question, why would we not translate the mantra if we're translating the rest of it? Especially in the case of something like the Heart Sutra, which a lot of it kind of reads like it's a mantra for all the sense that it makes when you just read it cold, like, what is this saying? Like, no eye, no ear, what does this mean? We'll get into that, of course, but it's not like it's a clear narrative or expository text, right? And then the mantra comes out of nowhere. The mantra is no less clear than the rest of the text. Nonetheless, it's always recited in Sanskrit. And this has to do with it has to do with the relationship that Sanskrit has had to, frankly, reality throughout the history of the use of the language. So Sanskrit, as many of you may know, was the kind of exclusive domain of specific classes of society in an ancient Indian context. As the language of the scripture of Brahmanical Hinduism, it was really the preserve of Brahmins as the kind of priestly class of society, and then people who are permitted to perform specific Brahmanical rituals, they have access to this language. Now, the language was understood to be a revealed divine language. So a language like English, I don't know, thermos, a word like thermos, it's made up. We could just as easy, we could call this a thermos, we could call it, um, I don't even know. I can't even think of how to make up a word right now because I feel like everything is a word in some language and I'm going to say something strange. But we could have easily called this a thermos and or phone, and we could call this thermos. It's anyways, it's pretty random. The sounds have their history, words have their history, but it's pretty random attribution of a specific sound to a specific object. Whereas with Sanskrit, it's understood to be a natural language, which means that the sound associated with an object, which we would, let's call it a word, the sound belongs to the object. So a word for, let's say the word for flower in Sanskrit is pushpa. It couldn't be any other word. It couldn't be. Because just the sound pushpa invokes the object in the same way that seeing it would. So if I see a flower and I have all those associations that go with it, or I smell a flower and the way that that invokes it, the sound of this term, pushpa, is a flower as much as any other aspect of the object. And that relationship between the sound and the object made understanding and studying Sanskrit really central to understanding and studying reality. To the extent that in an ancient Indian context, philosophers were grammarians. Grammar and the exploration of the nature of reality were the same discipline, which I think is really cool. Like I really love it. So the structure of the language, the sound of the language, the grammar of the language, understanding that is understanding reality. And so in a ritual context, like in a Vedic ritual context, having the correct pronunciation of everything is incredibly important because you are invoking the thing or presencing the thing, I should say. A mispronunciation means you're presencing something else. And this, okay, for flowers, maybe it doesn't matter so much. But let's think about someone like Avalokiteshvara. Pronouncing that name in Sanskrit is presencing the deity, if we think along those lines. Okay, and this is very much the case in a Brahmanical Hindu context. In a Buddhist context, it gets a little bit complicated, which we'll come around to in just a moment. Sorry, now that I'm talking about my thermos, I want water. But so the reason we wouldn't translate a deity's mantra, for example, like we can translate a sadhana of Avalokiteshvara, a practice text of Avalokiteshvara, but we don't translate the mantra. And the Tibetans didn't translate the mantra. The Chinese didn't translate the mantra. It's out of respect for this relationship that mantras have to reality. And this is something that does get problematized in a Buddhist context, because in a Buddhist understanding of the nature of reality, nothing has an inherent essential identity. For a sound to be the essence of, let's say, a deity, or to be an aspect of the essence of a deity, we have to believe in essences. So it does get problematized very significantly in a Buddhist context. Nonetheless, the tradition of reciting mantras in Sanskrit remains, of trying to pronounce them as accurately as possible, of maintaining that connection to the history of the language is important. And it is also, understood to be an important way of connecting to generations of communities of practitioners who have all pronounced it in this way as well. This is something that we then, share with generations and generations of people who came before us. But the relationship to the language is there is something very understood to be something very powerful about the sound of Sanskrit, in a way that the sound of other languages is not understood to be as powerful. Now, Sanskrit was not a language that was written down until around the start of the Common Era. So like from from the beginning of the Common Era. So like about 2000 years ago, maybe a little bit before that, it started to get written down, but Sanskrit doesn't have its own alphabet. For example, I know when we study Sanskrit in a contemporary context, we're supposed to learn Devanagari, the same alphabet that gets used for Hindi and Nepali and that kind of thing. But that is not Sanskrit. Its power is in its sound, not in the way that it's written. So this is again a reference to the importance of the sound of the language and orality. This type of connection to texts and words and that kind of thing. So this is why we recite the mantras in Sanskrit, a big part of why we recite the mantras in Sanskrit. And the language is understood to just have this incredible power to it. Okay, I feel like taking a very mini pause here again to just ask if you have questions before I continue. I can just speak in a continuous stream about this kind of stuff, so I am trying to rein it in. 2 thumbs up from Andrew. And from Cynthia.
Hey, Lara, the only
So,
question that occurs to me is in creating an alphabet for Sanskrit, it's by its nature an alphabet, right? What's that relationship? How did that happen?
it happened, my understanding of it is for it seems like the creation of an alphabet for Sanskrit seems to have happened at this moment. And again, it's like at the start of the Common Era. For some reason, Sanskrit started to be it started to be used in non-religious contexts. And there's a transition that happens like right around that period 2000 years ago, where instead of only being used for the Vedas and then related ritual texts and contexts, suddenly there are plays being written in Sanskrit, and kings are communicating with each other in Sanskrit, and aesthetic manuals and philosophical texts are being composed in Sanskrit. And with that, and around that period, there was this move to putting things in writing. It just got what's the word I'm looking for? As it was kind of introduced more into the sphere of mundane reality or mundane uses of language, it was given an alphabet or multiple alphabets. There's a book that I really love called The Language of the Gods in the World of Men, by Sheldon Pollock. And maybe I should put this in the chat. Oh, and sorry, Danielle, I just saw your message about the film. The film name. It was this move of the language from being exclusively a ritual language to being a language used for different types of communication. And with that, we see Sanskrit emerging for the first time in Buddhist literature. And this is also an interesting shift, because Buddha did not teach in Sanskrit. In fact, there's a really interesting moment depicted in one of the Pali Suttas, where some monks. So the kind of rhythm of life of the early monastic community is, the monks and nuns are out wandering, and they're mendicants, right? So they beg for their sustenance, and they're largely on the move, and they're teaching the Dharma. And then they all come together once a year for the rainy season retreat to spend a few months together in a community listening to the Buddha's teachings and that kind of thing. Is a very different rhythm of life from what being a monastic in a contemporary context has become. It's become many different things in many different cultural settings. But a couple of monks apparently went to Buddha and said, everybody is out teaching the Dharma, and they're teaching it in all kinds of vernacular languages. So, let's say one of you comes up to Montreal, and so you come and you teach in French, and then somebody else goes out to California and you start teaching it in Spanish. You do whatever is local, whatever is around you, you teach. And so these monks said, this means that there's a lot of variety in the way that the teachings are being transmitted. We should put it all into one language. We should put it all into Sanskrit. And the Buddha's answer was, no way. My teachings are, okay, now this is me paraphrasing, obviously. Okay, so he said something along the lines of, my teachings are fundamentally translatable. My teachings are translatable. One of the Buddha's most amazing powers that we read about was when he spoke, they say, everyone who heard him in their own language, which is really incredible, and also says a lot about how the Buddha's teachings function, right? If we need to learn Sanskrit to read the Vedas, then the only people who can access the Vedas are people who have the time to learn Sanskrit, who have the privilege to learn Sanskrit, who are able to make that time and space and dedicate the energy, and you come from a certain class of society and all of these things. Whereas a set of religious texts or scripture, whatever language we want to use for it, if anyone can access it in their own language, That means you don't have to be any particular person in any particular body belonging to any particular culture to access it, to have it be relevant to you, to have it be comprehensible to you. It is by design meant to be translatable. And so instead of putting everything into one language and making everybody come to that very complex language, the Buddha said, no, it should be taught in local languages to everyone. Fantastic. And then sometime around the dawn of the Common Era, suddenly there's Buddhist texts in Sanskrit. Nagarjuna wrote in Sanskrit. Ashvaghosha wrote in Sanskrit. Dharmakirti, Chandrakirti, Asanga, Vasubandhu. These guys all, I mean, these, you may or may not have studied their work, you may or may not have heard their names, but these are all like kind of big deal ancient South Asian Buddhist philosophers and poets. Okay. And their work is all in Sanskrit. So how did that happen, right? Like that suddenly there's this incredible proliferation of stuff happening in Sanskrit. It has to do with the way the language changed in the Indic context. Yeah, it has to do with the way that the language changed in the Indic context. And so it's kind of important to remember to historicize things like writers like Nagarjuna writing in Sanskrit and in wonderful Sanskrit, or Shantideva, or any of these amazing people. This doesn't, them writing in Sanskrit doesn't mean we all need to learn Sanskrit to access the Buddha's teachings. Okay. It is okay to access the Buddha's teachings in our own language. And it is important to be able to do so because, you know, the teachings on, you know, trying to eliminate ignorance through a systematic and reliable and accurate investigation of the nature of reality, we have to be able to relate to it in our own language and using our own minds, and you know, from within our own mental and cultural habits. Otherwise it's just adopting a completely foreign way of thinking. For it to actually work on us, we need to be able to connect to it. And very fortunately, this is built into the way that Buddha used language and encouraged his disciples to use language. Any other questions? Now, the Heart Sutra as a text, some of you may have read different versions of the Heart Sutra. Okay, there are, of course, different translations into different languages, and those will often use slightly different terminology for things. But there are two versions of it that are more radically different from each other. What we read in the Tibetan tradition is what we read out together at the start of today's talk, and what we read together, that's in the what we have in the practice book, the Dharmakaya practice book. These are all translations of the same Tibetan text that starts with "Thus have I heard," and you know, gives us like the whole setting, and then has the kind of central part of the sutra, this dialogue between Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra while Buddha is, you know, in his samadhi. And then in the end, We have the, sorry, I've got, again, going back and forth between all of these windows. And then in the end, we have this kind of wrapping it all up, the Bhagavan having so spoken, etc., etc. The other version of the Heart Sutra that we read, I'm just going to share this with you. I hope. Am I? I don't know. Lara, are you? Let me just try to find this. I think I have this queued up and ready for you, but I don't. Okay, so let me just tell you about it then. So the other version of the Heart Sutra that we have does not start with "Thus have I heard." It actually starts with the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara beheld the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and saw that those five aggregates are also empty. And then it continues until just after the mantra, when the Buddha rises from his samadhi. This, I'll get this out to you before tomorrow so that you can see it. But basically it's, sorry, I had it queued up, then I accidentally closed the window. And if I try to look for it now, we're gonna lose time. So basically the opening of it and the closing of it are not present in what is often referred to as the shorter version of the sutra. It's already a really short sutra, right? There is a shorter version than what we read. And this is the earlier version of the sutra. And this is what we have in Chinese, and what was therefore translated into Korean and Japanese. And quite fascinatingly, it is also probably what was translated into Sanskrit. There's a really interesting, this is just such an interesting moment in the history of a Buddhist scripture. It seems that at some point, sorry, I'm staring off into the distance. I'm looking at my notes because I don't want to give you generalizations when I actually have access to detailed information. So probably around the middle of the 7th century, the Heart Sutra was compiled in China. This is the kind of shocking idea of this being the case came up in some scholarship some years ago, and the whole scholarly community and then the practice community were all like, what? But then the more people have gone into it, the more it's starting to look amazingly like, this really may be the history of the text. So the Heart Sutra belongs to a genre of Buddhist literature called the perfection of wisdom literature. Okay, Prajna Paramita. Here, I'm going to share a pretty image with you of a beautiful Buddhist deity named the perfection of wisdom. Okay. And you can probably see my notes down here as well. This is a slide with the text in it was from like another lecture that I gave, but I think Mm, yeah, okay. One very useful part of those little notes down at the bottom of the screen. The traditional Buddhist story of the origins of the perfection of wisdom literature is that uh, Buddha taught this material, but humans were not ready for it yet. And there were some Nagas who were. Nagas are, just another, basically just another life form like humans. They coexist with us. They're kind of sneaky, serpentine beings. Um, they are associated with bodies of water, so they're often understood to they may have their dwellings at the in the bottoms of large bodies of water and that kind of thing. And they're not they're understood. They're like people. They can be Buddhist or they could be not Buddhist. Okay, they can be really smart. They can be really not smart. They're really just like people in that way. But a particular Naga king really understood the Buddha's teachings, and so the Buddha entrusted this Naga king with the perfection of wisdom literature. And then around the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era, when the time was right for humanity, it is said that Nagarjuna, the philosopher, retrieved these texts from the kingdom of this Naga king. Okay, so that is a um, a version of how these texts began to be circulated in the human realm. There's another version that says simply, well, it was just preserved orally until a specific time, and then it was written down later. We don't know, honestly, we don't know the origins of the perfection of wisdom texts, though we do have a sense, I will say, that they are earlier than the life of Nagarjuna, because there are some fragments of some texts written on birch bark, apparently, that date back to maybe around the 1st century before the Common Era. And so that places them like a little earlier than Nagarjuna. But the perfection of wisdom texts, it's as I have written in the slide here, it's a body of literature. There are a whole bunch of different perfection of wisdom texts. There's the Heart Sutra is teeny tiny, relatively speaking, and it goes right up into texts with tens of thousands of verses. Okay, so the text can be enormous or the text can be very condensed. All of them are really focused on the wisdom aspect of emptiness. So it's largely the subject matter that that unites them as a body of literature. It is a type of practice. It has become philosophy. These are texts that have been worshipped, by placing them into stupas and that kind of thing. They're understood when we say like a body of literature. It's also understood to be almost like the body of the Buddha, as a way of embodying the wisdom of the Buddha. We can treat the texts that way. The word itself is interesting, prajna paramita. Prajna so Sanskrit is a language that has gender in the words, like French, like German. It has masculine, feminine, and neutral. Prajna, the word for wisdom, is a feminine noun in Sanskrit. And it has become associated with what we could call the female principle, embodying the wisdom aspect. And then the masculine principle is understood to be associated with methods and compassion. Now, everyone is understood. This isn't to say that, I'm not saying women are smarter than men. they might be, I don't know. I'm teasing, I'm sorry, I can't help it. But these are understood to be principles that everybody has inside them. This isn't something that is, it's not that women should study philosophy and men should study skillful methods. It's not that. It's that my understanding of this is that this kind of gendered binary is mapped onto these really two important aspects of the Mahayana path, right? And these are things that we are all meant to cultivate and to unite, within our own body. This isn't like it's not a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not like some kind of obligatory heterosexuality or something like that's being communicated when I say uniting the masculine and feminine principle. These are things that are polarities, we can say, that all beings have inside them that are brought together. So I hope that's okay. Like the way I explained it, I mean. So it's a feminine noun associated with the female principle of wisdom, and with that female principle and the feminine noun, prajna has come to be imaged as a goddess, as a female deity. And so prajna paramita is imaged as, you can see the image here. She's a female deity holding a text in one hand, and she's carrying a vajra or dorje in her other hand, right? So this is also showing that the two aspects of method and wisdom are together in her, right? And which is something that we are all meant to be embodying. This is not something that is, limited to people who are in feminine bodies by any stretch of the imagination. She is often depicted or described, I should say, as the mother of all Buddhas. There is a primordiality associated with the wisdom of emptiness, and so the active engagement of Buddhas in the world and the wisdom that they bring. It's a way of creating a metaphor that many of us can relate to, right? It's not, let's say, necessarily meant to be taken super literally, although you may if you wish to, you may not if you do not wish. And then the next slide here is on the word paramita. There are two etymologies for the word paramita. The first comes from the word parama, meaning highest, most distant, most excellent. Thus, that of which there is nothing superior in this world is said to be excellent, parama. And so the excellence of wisdom is the perfection of wisdom. In the second etymology, paramita is divided into para and mita. Para meaning beyond and referring to the other shore, which is something that I think we have probably all heard, and mita meaning that which has arrived or that which goes. And it's connected to the verbal root, as you can see in the slide here. Ita in Sanskrit comes from the verbal root e, which means to go or to be. So going higher, going further, having crossed to the other shore. So I think, yeah, it's not an easy word, and the etymology of a lot of these words that we use in the Buddhist context can be really complicated. And as people, especially, yeah, there have been so many commentaries on this material that a lot of it has been like theorized to an enormous degree and to an enormous extent. And so there often isn't a really simple answer to questions, because a lot of brilliant minds have a lot of brilliant minds have turned their attention towards things like, well, what really is the etymology of prajna or of paramita? And then we in 2024 then have to, try to make sense of, 1,000 years of brilliant Tibetan commentaries and make some sense of it. So yeah, it's not easy. But yeah, so that's a little introduction to the idea of prajna paramita. All of this was in the context of these texts were circulating in the Indic context and in the Chinese context from as early as probably the 4th century, late second half of the 4th century. These texts start, we see these texts being translated into Chinese. This all went to China much earlier than it went to Tibet. And there are some statements specifically in the Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines that was translated into Chinese in, the late 4th, early 5th century. And some statements from that appear to be kind of word for word, line for line, the material we see in the Heart Sutra. And so some of these central statements, it seems like this is one of the possibilities, right? That a lot of these central statements in this 25,000 lines Perfection of Wisdom text were compiled into what we now read as the Shorter Heart Sutra. And it was like a shorthand for this much larger text that started getting circulated so widely that it started to be accepted as its own Perfection of Wisdom text, which was then brought back to India and translated into Sanskrit as a separate text. And the more the more popular it got, the more the text started to build. So then it was getting framed by this introduction that describes the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And by the time the transmission of this text goes to Tibet, it has been even more elaborated with, thus have I heard at one time, which is the traditional way of starting a sutra. Okay. And so, okay, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it is very much worth considering, and a perhaps quite strong case being made for the fact that this is a text with a kind of a later emergence into the world of humans, and probably initially compiled in Chinese, transmitted to India, translated into Sanskrit, then translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan. To be clear, from my point of view, and then this is up to each of us individually to make our own peace with it, from my point of view, this takes away nothing from what we get from the Heart Sutra. It takes away nothing. It remains an extraordinary text and a powerful text and a widely practiced text. But we may each need to find our own way towards either being okay with that, or you're welcome to jettison that idea completely as well, as you wish. But this is where, for me, my having a foot in different worlds, and I have a feeling that for many of us who are here together right now in this Zoom space, we probably all have a little bit of these multiple tendencies and curiosity about different ways that that knowledge is produced, and what have we received, and what are we practicing. I think that we are probably united in our curiosity about these things. though there's zero pressure to adopt any of the conclusions that I may adopt. So, okay. There's some of you have surely heard of the 84,000 project. This is a project that was started by Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, who it's an extraordinary project to translate the entirety of the Tibetan Kanjur and Tenjur into first English, but then into all kinds of other modern languages. It's an extraordinary project. And I was looking at the translation of the Heart Sutra on the 84,000 website today, and realized that in the introduction to that, and I mean, this is a totally dharmic undertaking under the auspices of Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche. That whole history of the Heart Sutra, the multiple versions of the Heart Sutra, and the possibility / likelihood that it is initially a Chinese text that was translated into Sanskrit, is there in the introduction to the text on the 84,000 website, and I found that really fascinating. To me, it really it signals like a very beautiful openness to some flexibility around sourcing some of our really important texts like this, and an openness to maintaining our connectedness to the practice that revolves around these texts, that doesn't depend on these texts being traceable necessarily back to the life of Shakyamuni Buddha. It's okay sometimes, I think, if things are a little more recent than we thought they were, or if they have unexpected backgrounds to them. But that is me, and I have had a lot of time to soak a lot of this material in. Any questions about this, or does anybody feel kind of challenged or weirded out by that possibility? Yeah, Colin, please.
Yeah. Given that many Sanskrit texts were lost, that were preserved in Chinese and in Tibetan, and sometimes we have texts in other languages, like Khotan. They discover periodically in caves, they discover copies, very old copies of original Buddhist texts. There's been, I gather, over the centuries, some, for example, Tibetan translators have back translated their Tibetan texts, which purport to have been translations originally of Sanskrit texts. Sanskrit texts are lost, so they back translate into Sanskrit. And there's a division of opinion about whether this is a legitimate practice. But anyway, the idea is that if the original translation was done fairly accurately, the original scholars were scrupulous in their translations and consistent, that at least it's not a completely arbitrary back translation. So how would one distinguish between saying that the Chinese version was not based on an original, now lost Sanskrit version, or alternatively, I gather what you're saying is that it seems like it was a redaction or a packaging or little wrapper of a core element of a longer version of the Perfection of Wisdom, some Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And I noticed that there's even a so-called, and I don't remember the title of it, but there's a summary version of Perfection of Wisdom, which is quoted by Gampopa, among others, when he goes through various scriptural references. So the summarization of longer sutras may have been a more common practice than mentioned. That's all. So that's there are two possibilities going on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a really important intervention to have here. Thank you, Colin. Celia, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a little puzzle about the view that some Mahayana sutras, including the Prajnaparamita sutras, were not suitable for human beings at the time when Buddha taught it, because it's clearly said in the sutras that, in the usual way, that Ananda was the one who narrated it. And there were references to humans in the audience. So how come it wasn't suitable for humans and was hidden by the Nagas? I'm having a little trouble with that. Yeah.
Great question, Celia. Thank you. You raise what has become actually a source of a lot of back and forth and opinions and writings in some Indic context, but largely also in a Tibetan context, where people have tried to make sense of exactly this. Who is the I in Thus Have I Heard? When we look at the history of the communal recitations right after the Buddha's death, we are taught that it's Ananda who recites all of the sutras, right? Because he was there by Buddha's side. But then in a lot of the Mahayana sutras, like in the Lotus Sutra, for example, which we don't really read much of in a Tibetan context, but I mean, we have Shravakas basically sticking their fingers in their ears when Buddha starts reciting this, leaving the room. They're someone who is not primed for Mahayana teachings is not able to hear, to understand, to process the Mahayana teaching. So this has led to actually quite a large amount of debate around who it is who heard the Mahayana sutras and remembered them. Was it Ananda who, through the Buddha's power, was able to hear and retain it even without understanding it? That's one possibility. Another possibility is that in the context of sometimes when we read Mahayana sutras and we're told who is there, Ananda and others, and then we're told about all the bodhisattvas who are there and deities who might be there and that kind of thing, that sometimes it's one of the bodhisattvas who may not have even been visible to the people who were there who heard these teachings, and the people may not have even heard them. There are these different explanations. But the question of who it is who heard these is the subject of a lot of debate. So I don't have an answer for you, though I did manage to talk for too long, even though I don't have an actual answer for you. But it's just to say it's a great question, and Buddhists have been asking it for hundreds of years. So yeah, there's this fabulous book called On Emptiness. And this is a book by Donald Lopez Jr., and he translates a number of commentaries on the Heart Sutra. And he has a chapter in here. Chapter 1 is Who Heard the Heart Sutra? And so this is a chapter that is at least it very carefully considers all the different opinions of who that may have been who heard it. So you might enjoy reading that, just to think even further through it, though there isn't a clear answer.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, I want to first of all just thank you with really deep gratitude. This was extraordinary, kind of high level for me, academic, but also from your heart, mind, and to reach me. And so I wanted to reflect that my excited, delighted, wonderful takeaway as a student from this is that in a very empirical, literary, ontological, epistemological, philosophical sense, the mantra, that's the core, is an actual, whatever the wanderings of what we have in the tens of thousands of lines, that mantra, Om Gate Gate, is itself right, reliably, empirically back to, I was going to say, the mouth of the Buddha, but in fact, what I love about the rest of it, which I think is a reliable transmission, is that it's kind of a mind meld, pith wisdom that the Buddha is giving to whoever version, to the different bodhisattvas. And so those words, that core, I go home from this lecture saying, well, that core mantra is absolutely, like all the way back. It's a visual transcription, but it's the sounds, and even beyond the sounds is that kind of, the taste, the smell, the scent, the feel of this heart teaching of the Dharma. So it's really very, very, very exciting for me. Thank you so much for this lecture.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for, yeah, I guess we're kind of out of time for today, but thank you all for being here. I can't tell you how much fun it is for me to be able to share this with everyone. Yeah, I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you,
Before
Lara.
we go, oh, you're so welcome.
You,
Let's
Lara.
No, you're very welcome. Shall we dedicate the merit before we go and have worldly thoughts? Something. Sorry, I just need to find it here. By this merit, having attained omniscience, may I defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. Thank you, everybody. See you, some of you, hopefully all of you tomorrow. Great. So we'll start again today with refuge and the immeasurables, and I will share my screen so that we are all on the same page here. Okay. So this will recite 3 times, and then I'll shift over to the 4 immeasurables and we'll recite that once. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sublime Assembly, I take refuge for as long as I have not accomplished the enlightened state. May I, due to the merit of practicing the 6 paramitas, such as generosity, accomplish enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sublime Assembly, I take refuge for as long as I have not accomplished the enlightened state. May I, due to the merit of practicing the 6 paramitas, such as generosity, accomplish enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sublime Assembly, I take refuge for as long as I have not accomplished the enlightened state. May I, due to the merit of practicing the 6 paramitas, such as generosity, accomplish enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the root of suffering. May they not be separated from the great happiness devoid of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free from passion, aggression, and prejudice. And let's go right into reciting the Heart Sutra, and then we'll dig in. Thus did I hear. At one time, the Bhagavan was abiding at Vulture Peak in Rajagriha with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan entered into a samadhi on the categories of phenomena called perception of the profound. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara, beheld the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and saw that those 5 aggregates also are empty of intrinsic existence. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara. How should a son of good lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom train? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, a son of good lineage or a daughter of good lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom, should perceive things in this way. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, conditioning factors, and consciousnesses are empty. Therefore, Shariputra, all phenomena are empty, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not stainless, undiminished, unfilled. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no conditioning factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomenon, no I constituent up to and including no mental consciousness constituent, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, no aging and death, up to and including no extinction of aging and death. In the same way, no suffering, origin, cessation, path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Because their minds are without obstruction, they have no fear. They pass completely beyond error and go to the fulfillment of nirvana. All the Buddhas who abide in the 3 times have fully awakened into unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment in dependence on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that completely pacifies all suffering. Because it is not false, it should be known to be true. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is stated thus: Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhi swaha. Shariputra, a bodhisattva, mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom in that way. Then the Bhagavan rose from Samadhi and said, "Well done to the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara. Well done, child of good lineage. It is like that. It is like that. The practice of the profound perfection of wisdom is just as you have taught it. Even the Tathagatas admire it." The Bhagavan, having so spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara, and all those surrounding, and the entire world, the gods, humans, demigods, and Gandharvas, admired and praised the speech of the Bhagavan. Well, now might be a convenient moment to actually take a look at the shorter version, which, even though it's shorter than this, which is already short, we don't need to recite it together, because time is, I will say, of the essence. I'm just going to share this other screen and show it to you. So this is on a website called The City of 10,000 Buddhas. And it's a translation of Xuanzang's translation. Okay, so this is the shorter version I was telling you about yesterday. This one starts with when Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva was practicing the profound Prajna Paramita, he illuminated the 5 skandhas, which the language of the translation is a little bit different from what we have just recited, but hopefully you get the sense that it starts, it starts a few lines in, and what is missing is, "Thus did I hear, at one time the Bhagavan was abiding at Vulture Peak with the great assembly, and that he entered into the Samadhi on categories of phenomena." This one just goes right in. In addition, we are also missing, "Then by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this." We don't have that here. And it ends with the mantra. So everything that comes after the mantra in the text that we usually recite, that is in the longer version of the Heart Sutra, is also gone. So the part where the Bhagavan rises from his samadhi, says, "Well done" to Avalokiteshvara, and everybody rejoices. So this does create, do you want me to put the URL in the chat? Just, I'll just do it. I will do it just as soon as I get oriented here. Hang on. In case anybody wants to take a look at it, because it is, I love that we have this example of such an important sutra that has so many, that has these quite significant differences. And as you know, I'll be kind of starting with talking about this, the setting of the sutra. I think we may or may not have time to talk about it today, but it can be interesting for each of us to think about how it may change our reading or understanding of the sutra if it starts differently. Now, that being said, I will turn to my notes here. Okay. I did consider having us listen to the Sanskrit today and following along with it, but I didn't 100% trust my capacity to connect my audio my computer audio to Zoom. I've been there before, and I didn't want to lose any time. And also because we're going more into the let's call it the discursive meaning of the text today. I thought it might be better for us to recite it in English so we have it fresh in our minds. But I am going to send you another URL here that if you hang on to this, those of you who are interested, this gives you the Sanskrit transliterated into our alphabet. So you can follow along while you're listening to the chanting. You can follow along and chant with it if you want to. I highly encourage you to do so. It is such a pleasure to sing along with that gorgeous recording of it being chanted. And it's also, I find, really helpful for one's Sanskrit pronunciation to read along like that and get a sense of how it's intended to be pronounced, now that we all know how important it is to pronounce our Sanskrit properly. And it gives a nice melody for chanting the mantra as well, which I find having a melody to be really helpful for planting a good earworm, let's say. If you want something to pop into your head, it might as well be the mantra from the Heart Sutra. Okay. Okay. Any questions from yesterday that you would like me to address before I jump in here? Okay. I will go. Maria, okay, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, as far as practicing it, I'm glad you gave this link so we can follow along with the recording. Is it still helpful to do it in English and sit there and read it, since you were saying that this gives all the benefits you were talking about yesterday? Good to do it in both.
It is. I highly recommend continuing to chant it in English, because I mean the Sanskrit is it's important, and well, I find it beautiful, but you know, the translatability of Dharma is really important to the practice of Dharma, and so I think that it's important for us to remember that and permit ourselves to relate to the Dharma in the languages that we're comfortable in, because we'll get something very different from that experience. So yes, please continue to chant in English.
Thank you, thank you.
Amba.
Hi. So when I clicked on that link, it's a document. I don't see a recording. Are we supposed to see a recording there?
Oh, that doesn't have the recording. That's just the document. Did you get the link to the recording?
Oh, I see. We got it in the email. That's what you're talking about. The one you sent in the email. Yes. Okay. Got it. Okay.
It was.
Yeah. All right. And are we going to get a recording of these sessions at the end? Do you know?
I
Yes.
think.
Yeah. Okay.
Daniel.
Yes, Amba, we will be sending yesterday's and today's out in the next day or so.
Okay. Fabulous. Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Anything else, or shall I'll forge ahead. You know, we didn't talk about the why this is often referred to as the Heart Sutra, even though it's a very shortened title. The heart, or Hridaya, it has to do with like this it's the kind of, I hate to use the word essence, especially given where we're about to go conceptually, but it's kind of a condensation of the perfection of wisdom. It's the heart kernel of it, we could say. And so it's the heart of the, yeah, it's condensed, it's the essence, it has all the power of the perfection of wisdom in there. And it's a sutra. We talked yesterday a bit about the journey of this text from being a kind of condensed a condensed excerpt from possibly from a much longer Perfection of Wisdom Sutra that then starts getting circulated as a sutra. And I thought it might be helpful because I know I completely understand that it can be challenging in different ways for different people to hear different versions of how these texts circulate as sutras. And so in case that's challenging to anybody, I thought it might be helpful to review some of the ways that Buddhists have over time dealt with the emergence of new texts and whether or not to consider them authoritative, how to consider them authoritative, because this isn't something that's new to us in 2024 as a kind of globalized Buddhist community. This is something that Buddhists have been dealing with for as long as there have been Buddhists, basically, is how do we account for or how do we decide on the authoritativeness of teachings if we are not in the presence of the Buddha listening to it directly from his mouth. And so there are different versions of this, but at its most in its most foundational form, we have what are called the four authorities, or the Mahapadesha, which maybe you've heard of. The four authorities to help us establish whether teachings are authoritative or acceptable or not in a Buddhist context. And in this case, here's my kitty cat. Hi, Dicky, you want to come say hi? In this case, this has to do with turning our attention away a little bit from the speaker and focusing a little bit more on what is being said and how to navigate that. So in a foundational Buddhist context, tests are provided. I'm reading here from the Lopez book on page 29 because he gives a really nice summary of the four Mahapadeshas. Tests are provided for determining whether the words that a monk reports to have heard from one of the four authorities are the teachings of the Buddha. The words of the Buddha, of a community of elders, of a smaller group of learned elders, or of a single learned monk. So these are the sources that are being tested, whether they are authoritative. When someone claims to have heard a teaching directly from one of these four sources, the Sangha may determine whether it is the word of the Buddha by seeing whether it fits into the sutras. So is it consistent with what we have studied in sutras that we already know are authoritative? Is it in agreement with the Vinaya? If it does, so with the ethical guidelines, if it is consistent with these, it is to be accepted. If it is not consistent with these, it is to be rejected. Okay, and what we have developing specifically in a Mahayana context is a third criterion to conformity with the sutras and the Vinaya, which is that the words do not go against the way things are. They do not go against the nature of reality, dharmata, which is quite broad. Okay, which is quite broad and not something very easily determined by an individual such as myself. But I just wanted to bring this up because, I mean, there's a lot more to be said on determining the authenticity or authoritativeness of a text in a Buddhist context. But I think it's important to know that this is something that Buddhists have been navigating for a couple of thousand years. This is not something that is new to us, and there are tools for navigating this. And so we should never hesitate to ask the hard questions of the Dharma, in my opinion, because there are always ways of we shouldn't hesitate to ask the hard questions because I feel that the Dharma is rich enough, expansive enough, flexible enough to handle the hard questions. This is what we're supposed to be doing with this material, is not simply accepting it as doctrine because it's presented as such, but to permit ourselves to question it as well. And so this has been part of my journey in studying this material. Sorry, I have to plug in the computer. Studying this material in a university setting has posed a lot of challenges for me. Things that I thought I knew or understood or had confidence in sometimes have gotten challenged, but it has really helped me develop a much more, I don't know what word to use, honest or open relationship with the Dharma, instead of it has gotten rid of whatever fear I may have had of asking difficult questions of it. Sorry. So let's look now at the opening of the sutra. So, at one time, thus did I hear. We talked a bit about that yesterday, the who is the I question, right? And so we'll start with, at one time, the Bhagavan was abiding at Vulture Peak and Rajagruha with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan entered into a samadhi on the categories of phenomena called perception of the profound. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, the noble Avalokiteshvara, beheld the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and saw that those 5 aggregates also are empty of intrinsic existence. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva. I'm just shortening it a bit. How should a son of good lineage who wishes to practice? And then Avalokiteshvara answers. This is a really complex setting for a sutra. This is a really complex setting for a sutra because we have all of these different layers of narrative sort of nested into each other. Now, there's this kind of part in the middle that we see is the content of the entire shorter version of the sutra. But this framing narrative of Buddha entering into a samadhi. So, I mean, if we picture this, right? So, Buddha, he enters into a deep meditative absorption. And then he he enters into this deep meditative absorption. Then the narrative tells us that at that moment, Avalokiteshvara suddenly sees the emptiness of the 5 aggregates. And then by the power of the Buddha, who, remember, is in a deep meditative absorption, Shariputra suddenly thinks to ask Avalokiteshvara a question. And so what we have here is Buddha entering into an absorption where we can, based on certainly not personal experience of being in meditative absorption, but in my idea of what meditative absorption may be, the stillness in body and the stillness in mind, or whatever is going on is internalized. So Buddha is entering this a state where he's not speaking, he's not engaging his senses with external phenomena, but he becomes this arena or this space to make a conversation happen. So he goes quiet, and Shariputra starts a conversation with Avalokiteshvara through the Buddha's power. This is it's almost just like a mise en scène, like putting on a display or some kind of play for the benefit of beings. And so this contrast of the stillness and the conversation is really, really fascinating to me. I think that it is okay, and then we see the way it wraps up. So I get overexcited, and then I kind of start thinking about different rabbit holes I can go down, and I'm just trying to stay focused with you here. So then at the end of the sutra, after Avalokiteshvara says all the things he needs to say about how a bodhisattva should train, then the Buddha, the Bhagavan, it just means the Lord in Sanskrit, and it's an epithet of the Buddha, in case that's unclear. He comes out of his samadhi and then praises Avalokiteshvara and says, basically, it is, you got it. It's exactly like that. You said it perfectly. And then the Bhagavan having so spoken, everybody rejoices. I mean, the words, the content of the sutra came from Avalokiteshvara's mouth. All Buddha said was, well done. But we're told that, Shariputra, Avalokiteshvara, everyone around, the entire world, the gods, humans, demigods, Gandharvas, everybody admires and praises the speech of the Bhagavan. But when we think about it, all the Bhagavan said was, well done. And so we're looking at this entire speech of Avalokiteshvara, if not the entire display of first Shariputra's question and then Avalokiteshvara's answer, can be understood to be the words of the Buddha as well. But they're being, if I may use the word, ventriloquized. Right? There's like this active ventriloquy going on. Buddha goes quiet, Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra speak. And it's all taken as the words of the Buddha. This is why I say it's a really complex setting for a sutra. It's not a simple case of someone saying something. And it also opens the space for the words of the Buddha not necessarily only coming from the Buddha's mouth, which is a really important thing to consider. I know that even in the kind of more foundational textual tradition, like in the Pali Canon, for example, even there, not all of the teachings, not all of the scripture is attributed to the Buddha. Actually, one of the other people who utters a lot of teachings that are, or quite a number of teachings that are preserved in the Buddhist canon, one of the other people is Shariputra. Shariputra is in the context of where Mahayana would say this is Shravaka, the Shravaka Buddhist tradition. Shariputra is understood to be like he's taken as like the philosophical master of a lot of this material. He presents a lot of teachings that we would classify as Abhidharma, which I'll go into shortly what that means. But like the kind of the enumeration of phenomena, the description of phenomenal reality, the nature of the constituent parts of reality and that kind of thing. A lot of those teachings are attributed to Shariputra. And so it's kind of fascinating that Shariputra then becomes like the fall guy in a lot of Mahayana sutras. You know, he's the one who doesn't understand, and it needs to be explained by Avalokiteshvara. Whereas in the Pali context, Shariputra is the authority on describing reality. So there's like a little bit of intertextuality between different collections of Buddhist texts going on there. Sorry, Andrew, did you have a question? Oh yeah, Crystal and Andrew. I don't know. Whoever wants to go first, go for it. I can't hear you, Crystal. I see your mouth moving, but you need to unmute yourself.
Can you please clarify what Avalokiteshvara said? I don't know how I just missed that. What exactly did he say?
Oh, we'll come right. Thank you so much. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. It's actually the main meat of the sutra is what Avalokiteshvara said.
Well, what really is shocking to me, the first time I heard this was right before I met Khenchen Rinpoche, and I just started crying. That's all I know. And I still feel shocked, totally shocked about Hinayana, the teachings that seem to be so prevalent. And I don't see this great joy that you have mentioning that the Buddha had. So said, well done. You know, but the joy, I don't, you know, okay, that's.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully when I come back to the kind of main contents, it'll be more clear. And if not, we'll come back to it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Andrew, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have lots of questions. I don't want to interrupt the flow, but just to drop in, not for response now, but just for perhaps later. The Om, it doesn't show up in the second version. In the first version, it's in the parentheses or brackets. I noticed you didn't read it, so at some point, not now. Like I said, I don't want to divert. Kind of, you might, if you could address that core
Okay,
question.
I'll try to come back.
Yeah.
Sure, to it. Celia.
Oh, hi. I just want to mention that I shared a couple of things in the chat, if anyone wants to see. To me, the reason I shared is that I feel for practice, it is not very inspiring if we spend tremendous amount of time getting into scholarly research and so on. But I did spend a little time because I couldn't, I mean, I went through this a little bit, but I felt quite uninspiring to delve into these disagreements about like the Shravakas, Mahayana, and even Vajrayana and so on. From my experience, I clearly see the qualities, especially the real persons with their qualities, and I see the difference. And I see that's why the different paths can lead to different results. So that's why I feel, scholarly speaking, people can dispute all the time and for ages and forever, but the inspiration comes from what we get from the sutras. And there's a lot of evidence against the scholars saying that the Heart Sutra was back translated and things like that. So anyway, I just want to mention that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Nothing that you sent showed up in the chat that that I can see. So you might have sent it as a direct message to someone by accident.
Oh,
But
what where should I send it?
but yeah, I mean, as I said yesterday, no one is obliged to agree with what I am saying or to accept what I'm saying. You are all here voluntarily. That being said, the the scholarship being done, yeah, how do I want to phrase this? Using the word evidence is maybe not that helpful when it is appealing to a different type of discourse around the origins of the sutras. But yeah, I mean, everyone is welcome to believe what they want. I hope I made that clear yesterday.
Yeah, it looks like we can only send a direct message to Dharmakaya Center and then to you, right? There's no way to share with the group
No, maybe
somehow.
you can work that out with Danielle on like quietly through direct message right now, and then I'll continue with the teachings because
Yeah.
time is short.
Yeah, I can put it in there. If you do meeting group chat, that will send it to everyone. You just have to drop down and select it, but I will pick up what you put out there for the whole group.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will ask going forward that as questions come up, it'll be helpful if they pertain to the things that I'm talking about in the moment. Otherwise, it's maybe helpful to keep them for the end. So, okay. So I think it can be kind of interesting to think, you know, the word great comes up a lot, maha, in Sanskrit. The word great comes up quite repeatedly in the context of this sutra. The bodhisattva, mahasattva, so the great being, the maha bodhisattva. There's a lot of greatness, great assembly and all. And so I thought you might enjoy hearing a little bit about the idea of greatness as it is discussed in a commentary. Hang on, I'm just going to find this. Of course, I made a note to myself to look in the commentary and then forgot to write down the page number, but I will find it. So this is the commentary. There are a few different, of course, there are so many different commentaries, and I mean, we can set aside Wikipedia. We have, you know, over 1,000 years of Buddhist scholars analyzing this and going back and forth. The commentary that I'm looking at here is one from Vimalamitra and Atisha. And there are a bunch of commentaries translated in here, but this is the one that I am looking towards. So when we hear about greatness, the great assembly of monks, right? So if we have think about the text here. So there's a great assembly of monks, a great assembly of bodhisattvas, and then we talk about the great being and all of this. A great assembly of monks this is from the commentary, indicates those gathered to be included in the teaching. So it's I'll come back to that in a sec, but it indicates everybody to be included. Regarding that, because they have destroyed the afflictions, they are monks. Because they have destroyed the afflictions, they are monks, which I think is a very beautiful definition of a monk. The assembly is great because of being a large group or because of their wisdom, emanations, and so forth. So great can mean size and number. Great can mean the qualities of the beings who are included in the description. So beings who have great wisdom constitute a great assembly, even if it's a small number. Okay. And then there's more detail on this, on the greatness. The great assembly of Bodhisattva Mahasattvas specifically indicates three greatnesses. The great intention that makes one the supreme of all sentient beings. So the great intention means, of course, bodhicitta, right? The altruistic intention, the compassionate intention. The great intention, the great abandonment, so renouncing samsara and the causes of suffering, and the great realization. Okay, so there are like three specific types of greatness that are listed here. And coming back to the idea of those gathered to be included in the great assembly of monks, it might be asked who it is that is included. This is in the commentary still from Atisha. The included are those whose roots of virtue produced earlier have fully ripened to establish the perception of hearing such a doctrine. It is a term for those who have the fortune to hear the doctrine. I love this. Why? Because if those gathered to be included in hearing the teachings are all of those whose roots of virtue are ripened enough to be able to hear the doctrine, there is a sense in which we can consider the idea that maybe we are also among those to be included. Those of us who have encountered this sutra, those of us who have the incredible good fortune to meet the teachings, there is, for me, some kind of beautiful magical hint that we are also included in this assembly. There's something so beautiful for me also about, bringing a text to life through reciting it and really contemplating who is there. When we say it out loud, we are performing, let's say, or enacting this delivery of the teachings. And doing this together, we are creating our own assembly of people hearing the teachings. And so there's a sense in which we witness and hear the teachings quite directly when we engage in when we engage in this sort of active way with the text. And so I love that thought that we may be able to consider ourselves a part of that assembly just on the basis of that. So I wanted to share that with you because it's something I really love in this commentary. Okay, so that is the greatness. Now, as I mentioned, Shariputra, he is the guy who a lot of the teachings in the Pali Canon on Abhidharma. So the description of all of the internal and external phenomena, delineating the conditioned and the unconditioned, talking about all the constituent parts of reality, the very detailed what we would often in English now call a psychology, explanation of human psychology. or the psychology of all sentient beings, a lot of those teachings are attributed to him and included in canonical teachings. Okay, a lot of the Abhidharma material that's been classified as Abhidharma, and the Abhidharma is a body of literature that concentrates on training our capacity for critical cognition through proper methods of inspection. It teaches us how to be systematic in the way that we analyze things, and it's through correct cognition that we're able to eliminate the causes of suffering. So it's a very important aspect of the teachings, a very important aspect of the teachings. But what happens here in the context of this Mahayana Sutra is that Shariputra is the one who doesn't quite get it. And who does get it, it's Avalokiteshvara. Now, I find this also, having Avalokiteshvara in this role, to be really fascinating, because you know, the Bodhisattva of wisdom is Manjushri. Avalokiteshvara's principal quality that we think of when we think of Avalokiteshvara is compassion. And so the fact that these deepest teachings on the perfection of wisdom are being uttered by Avalokiteshvara, whose deepest association is with compassion, for me gives this very deep interconnectedness of compassion and wisdom at the heart of Mahayana. It's a way of embodying the union of compassion and wisdom. You know, it's not like compassion is just for the nice guys and wisdom is for the sharp-tongued guys kind of thing. It's these have to be integrated together. And so the simple fact of having this coming out of Avalokiteshvara's mouth is a very profound aspect of this sutra for me in my reading of it. Now, back into the sutra. So Avalokiteshvara, okay, well, I guess first, the Buddha enters a samadhi on categories of phenomena called perception of the profound. Now, the profound is a way of referring to emptiness, which we'll talk about more. And meditating on varieties of phenomena. So these could be internal phenomena like thoughts and feelings. They could be external phenomena like forms, for example. He enters into this, and then what comes out of it. So he enters into this absorption on emptiness, and what happens is that a spectacular dialogue takes place separate from him, right? This is the scene that we set before. And a conversation between two beings, a great bodhisattva and a great disciple, a conversation like that is probably an it's extremely dualistic. Okay, there's no two ways about it. There are two beings, they're speaking to each other. One asks a question, the other one answers. There are multiple voices. There are, you know, distinct beings involved. It's very conventional in that sense. And so through the way that that this discourse is put into place, the Buddha has this deep absorption into emptiness, and then this conversation, this display of a conversation takes place. It's a way of indicating that phenomena and the world and beings are not negated by emptiness. They are not erased by emptiness. The relationship between emptiness and phenomena is being demonstrated in a very, in my opinion, very profound way here. In a way, it is almost like a summary of the sutra, showing this relationship between the conventional and the ultimate, between the perception of the profound, so insight into emptiness, and then the conventional display here exhibited through language and a conversation and an exchange of concepts between these two beings. So there's this really important way in which the kind of the heart of the Heart Sutra is being it's being expressed in a number of different ways in the sutra. Now, Shariputra's question, okay, so Avalokiteshvara sees that the 5 aggregates are empty of intrinsic existence. I think that I don't want to make any assumptions. Do you know what the 5 aggregates are? Like approximately? Yeah. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. We see them in the heart, multiple thumbs up. We see them in the Heart Sutra. Form, feeling, discrimination, conditioning factors, and consciousness. Okay, form, feeling, discrimination, conditioning factors, and consciousness. Now, there are different translations in different different versions of different translations. This is the one that I'm going with because it's what we have in our translation of the sutra. Okay, so it's just to keep it consistent with that. I'll just finish this thought and then I'll take the questions. The 5 sutras, the five aggregates, are the kind of, I don't want to say it's a shorthand for a description of a being, but it is, it is the way that Buddha classifies all of the processes of all of the internal processes and our external form as well. It's a description of a being. And it's pretty fundamental to understanding Abhidharma teachings and the nature of a being. And so it's not at all a coincidence that he has this insight into the emptiness of intrinsic nature of the 5 aggregates. And then Shariputra is the person who asks him the question. Okay, there's a connection there. It's almost like a very gentle challenge to Shariputra's teachings, that this is the insight that Avalokiteshvara has. Yeah, Crystal, you had a question. Oh, okay. Sorry. Cynthia, did you have a question? No? Okay.
Actually, the question that I still am not clear. I would really like to get clear on why Buddha said this is so great. Thank you to Avalokiteshvara. What exactly did Avalokiteshvara say?
Yeah, we're just getting started on that.
Oh, maybe I'm just too impatient.
No, I mean, you're not, because it's we can talk about this till the cows come home and then do the same thing again tomorrow, and it may never, like once it's really clear, we will be realized beings. So just to kind of put it in that context. I mean, basically, the absence of intrinsic existence. Intrinsic existence, the Sanskrit word is svabhava, which means like own nature or own essence. And it's a specific way of, it's like the essence of a thing, the definition of which is very specific to the philosophical, an Indian or South Asian philosophical tradition. The essence is defined as something that is permanent and unchanging and independent. So not arising independence on other things. So for example, a desk. What makes it a desk? Is it something from the side of the desk itself? Does it have some inherent, permanent, universally recognizable and legible deskness to it? Right? That desks don't matter that much, but we'll come around to what does matter. The desk can be broken into parts. We're all of us on this Zoom able to understand and function well in English, so we know how we use a desk. We know we can make something into a desk by using it in a specific way. We can take, I have a wooden desk right here that I could take apart and use as kindling. I can repurpose it, in other words. It's being a desk isn't something about the object itself. It's about the way we use it and describe it and think about it. Okay, so it is independence on our way of interacting with it. Desks don't matter. Sentient beings matter. Minds matter. What makes a person a person? What makes Lara Lara? Is it something from inside of me that makes me me independently of anyone or anything else? No way. No part of me is independently from its own side existent. My body comes from my parents' bodies, or their biological matter, right? The growth of this body comes from my ability to extract oxygen as I breathe, my ability to access and digest food, my like I am always in dependence on an environment externally and internally as well, all of these internal processes that are going on. And all of that depends on conditions, and those conditions depend on conditions. We are like these constantly changing sets of circumstances and conditions that are constantly producing new conditions. And the self, or the idea of a self, is like it's like a shorthand illusion. It's a shorthand way of referring to a set of constantly changing processes that is, upon analysis, completely illusory and causes a whole lot of suffering, because our belief that it is something inherently existent and in any way permanent causes us tremendous suffering. And it is an idea based in ignorance and delusion. And so the five aggregates as this way of referring to a being, if we say, okay, sentient beings don't have souls, which is really largely what this is about, the idea of an Atman, an existent, permanent, independent soul. If we can accept that there's nothing unchanging or essential to any of us that we are these kind of 5 groupings of processes, then what are these 5 processes? We can then say, okay, we don't have an Atman, but we have 5 aggregates. And so then those have some kind of real substantial reality to them. This is what Avalokiteshvara is challenging. Okay, he's saying, don't cling to the 5 aggregates as essentially real. Okay, those are just a way of grouping processes. It's a way of referring to a being. And so when he says, form is empty, like this is where Avalokiteshvara like really, he goes straight into the heavy stuff. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, conditioning factors, and consciousnesses are empty. So a couple of important things here. We'll start with the form is emptiness, emptiness is form, because this is one of the most often repeated quotations from a sutra that we come across, that we can ever come across. And okay. Emptiness and form. I'm reading from some notes here so that I stay a little bit on track. Emptiness and form cannot be conceived of as separate from each other. When we say form is emptiness and emptiness is form, we are saying that they cannot be conceived of as separate from each other. When we say that form is empty, so form, physical form is empty. It is like an antidote to believing in the substance of form. It's the emptiness of the phenomenal world, of the world that we perceive. So that's form is empty. Emptiness is form. Here we are being asked to see emptiness, to understand that emptiness arises as dependent arising. Emptiness arises as this process of interdependence, and it's like an antidote to nihilism. Okay, does that make sense? That, you know, we could fixate on what feels like a very substantial external reality, and we're being told that that is empty. It has no lasting essence. And then we're told that emptiness isn't something apart from phenomenal reality. Emptiness is form. The only way that we have to access emptiness is through the appearance of phenomena, through seeing how phenomena arise in dependence. And then when it's repeated that emptiness is not other than form, we're seeing here the union of emptiness and form, that there's no emptiness apart from its arising as form. And when we hear that form is not other than emptiness, form or appearance is the expression of emptiness. It is nothing other than that. So this formulation in these 4, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. It's meant to cut off all the possible directions of conceptual elaboration. Okay, it's supposed to stop us from to be like an end point to any of the conceptual rabbit holes we may be tempted to go down. Amba, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to point out to Crystal that this is what Avalokiteshvara said, right? I mean, we're in the meat of what he's saying now, right? So if you have the text in front of you, it's that paragraph in the middle. So I just wanted to point that out for Crystal. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we think about form as emptiness and emptiness as form, okay, I don't want to say that it's clear, because it really feels clear to me, but we can relate to form, perhaps quite intuitively as a thing to think. Sorry, I'm holding up my hand. This is the form that I'm focusing on right now. Thinking about this form and how what I can call it a hand, but I could also call it, you know, 4 fingers and a thumb and a palm. I can think of it as a bunch of skin and bones and sinew. I can think of it, I can analyze it further and further and further, right? So I can see the emptiness because it is a collection of parts plus my mind that creates the hand. Okay. But it's not only about form. When the text continues, feeling, discrimination, conditioning factors, and consciousness, we are supposed to run each of the 5 skandhas through this same process. So it's not just form is emptiness and emptiness is form. It's feeling is emptiness and emptiness is feeling. Emptiness is not other than feeling. Feeling is not other than emptiness. Discrimination, or perception, sometimes we call it. Discrimination is empty. Emptiness is discrimination. Emptiness is not other than discrimination. Discrimination is not other than emptiness. The same goes for the discriminating the conditioning factors and consciousnesses, the sense consciousnesses. And so one of the things that makes this text so condensed is that it doesn't spell out the whole process for each of the things that it names. Okay, so we go through the whole form is emptiness and emptiness is form, and then the other aggregates are just listed because we are meant to do that work ourselves. Okay. And the list that then follows here, all phenomena, all of the senses, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body. These are the mind. These are the 6 sense organs. This is the mind as a sense organ. Okay, that's being referred to here. No form, sound, odor, taste, object of touch, or phenomenon. These are the objects of our sense organs. No I constituent up to and including no mental consciousness constituent, whatever it is that enables the connection of a sense faculty and a corresponding object. So this is a kind of shorthand way, especially where it's written no I constituent up to and including no mental consciousness constituent. This is clearly a text that is being circulated by people who have studied Buddhist thought, because we are supposed to be able to read this and put those pieces together. Okay, it's and then no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, no aging and death, up to and including no extinction of aging and death. That is shorthand right there for the whole 12 links of dependent arising. That starts with ignorance and ends with aging and death. We're supposed to read these and then fill in the 10 that are in between. Okay. So I'm going through this rather quickly now because I just realized how quickly the time is flying. And so I just want to try to hit a few of the major things in here. So what we have going on in here is there are 2 different types of reasoning going on in here. One is this kind of mirroring: form is emptiness, emptiness is form, feeling is emptiness, emptiness is feeling, this kind of back and forth. Okay, this is one way of reasoning through it, to see the union of emptiness and conditioned reality, or the union of emptiness and phenomena, maybe I should say, internal and external. And then when we get into this other list, where it's just the language just presents us with a list of negations. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, right up to no suffering, no origin, no cessation, no path. This is a reference to the Four Noble Truths, right? This is some radical language going on here for Buddhists, right? And so we can easily read this and feel feel like deeply destabilized by it, right? So when I read in some Mahayana sutras, we don't have it here, but in some of the other ones, like in the Lotus Sutra, for example, sometimes when the Buddha is uttering a Mahayana teachings, the Shravakas are shown like sticking their fingers in their ears, leaving the room, all of that kind of thing. I get it. It's really challenging to hear this stuff, and that's okay. And there's space for people to not be okay with this. But what is going on here with these lists of negations is we have just been taught by Avalokiteshvara that emptiness does not negate phenomena. Okay, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Emptiness is not a negation. It is not an eraser. It does not create a blank space. We don't abandon the conventional when we perceive the ultimate. Emptiness doesn't negate how phenomena arise, but it can deeply change how we experience what arises. So we can think of it maybe usefully as a kind of epistemic transformation, the way that we relate to arising phenomena, the way that the mind relates to arising phenomena, including its own phenomena, is something that gets transformed. I have, oh wait, I'm going to try to be very selective about what I say here. Okay. So there are a couple of ways of understanding what is happening with this list of negations. Okay, there are two, probably more, but two major interpretations of what is being described here. One of them is that because we know from the setting of the sutra that all of these things that Avalokiteshvara is saying are coming somehow out of the Buddha's absorption into this profound absorption on emptiness. So one understanding is that with all these negations, is that it's a description of what happens when someone enters into the equipoise on emptiness, where form, feeling, perception, etc., will literally not arise because the mind is so absorbed, it is not participating in generating these particular illusions during the course of that absorption. That is one of the ways of understanding this. And so this is a way of yeah, it's one of the interpretations. Another interpretation, and I'll come back to this in a sec. The other one, which personally for me is easier to relate to, but that's because it relies on discursive stuff. And I tend towards discursivity. Is that it means that when we say there is no form, there is no eye, there is no ear, that this is a shorthand way of saying there's no intrinsically existing form. There is no intrinsically existing feeling. There is no intrinsically existing nose, no intrinsically existing odor, etc. So it's not denying the arising or experience of these phenomena, but it is saying that they are not intrinsically existent. They don't have existence from their own side. They don't have any kind of essence. Now, whether one goes with one interpretation of this or another, the Heart Sutra, another way that the Heart Sutra is read, which or recited, is as a practice text, which we can read it as ritual. It can be protective. It can have all of these different functions. It can also be a meditation text. And the type of meditative practice that is being expressed through this text is going to depend on the individual teacher and the individual disciple. Okay, and so this is a text that, depending on who you're reading it with and what they are using it for, it can be used to teach different types of meditation. So there are these different interpretations that come out of it. And the interpretations of the mantra, for example, that becomes a big one too, because it can also help to determine whether this is being read as a sutric text or as a tantric text. There are differences around that too. Okay, it's not that mantras only appear in tantric texts. That is not the case, but it can be taught in a tantric way. I am kind of surprised to see that it is already 20 after 2. And so, and I feel like I really only got us through the very, very first little bit here. So I'm really not sure what to do about that. I would love to just keep talking, but I'm not going to just keep talking. I want to give you a chance to ask questions if you have questions. But just since I mentioned the mantra, I'll come quickly to what Andrew brought up at the beginning about the Om. It's in the square brackets in this translation, which indicates that it's not in the Tibetan text. When it's in square brackets, it's inserted by the translator. Mantras traditionally start with Om and will end often with Swaha. And so it's implied, because this is a mantra, that it would start with Om. And so sometimes but it's not transmitted in the text itself. But when we see it done in calligraphy, the Om is included. But we'll often see it, hang on. Like when I shared this image yesterday of this monk, Hoichi, having the Heart Sutra written on his body, you can see the Om is here written in red. So it's set apart from the rest of the text. And so I think that its special status as being implied, but not necessarily reproduced in the written text is indicated through the way that it's set apart when we see it in calligraphy. But there are different, different versions of it. Anyways, I'm sorry to be jumping around like that. I didn't quite think time would pass this quickly, and yet I realize I'm very silly for having imagined it wouldn't. Do you have questions or specific things you would like me to address? Amba?
Yes, thank you. Would you give us your, it's not allowed, but translation of the mantra?
Oh.
If you don't feel comfortable, that's fine too. I just thought I'd ask.
I mean, it's really like gate is it's like I think it's a past participle. I'm not always very good at grammar. Okay, full disclosure. I think it's called a past participle. It means basically gone. It's like the past version of gum, to go. So it's something like gone, gone. Para, and like yesterday we were talking about the para and parama, meaning the opposite side of anything, or perfected, or highest, or like the opposite bank. So paragate, or paragate can mean something like it's often translated as completely gone or totally gone. Deeply, totally, utterly gone. Parasangate, it's completely, utterly, totally gone. What is gone? Ignorance? I don't know. The obscurations. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And then bodhi is bodhi, awakening. Swaha. It's I mean, it doesn't really need a translation, but it's like something that is actually, I think it means something like something that is well said. But yeah, it's oh, I couldn't hear you. I can see you speaking, but I can't
Sorry.
hear you.
Well, like in a puja, you offer to the fire and say swaha or homa, right? Swaha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mantras are difficult because they're not really meant to be understood discursively. And I think that this is also part of the intention, even in our anti-essentialist Buddhist context, of maintaining the Sanskrit of mantras, is I mean, it appeals a bit to this like beautiful magic of the Sanskrit language. It also kind of forces us to relate to mantras non-discursively. So to sort of permit them to work on us in a different way, to train us in a different way of relating to the sounds that we're uttering, even though there are clearly words in there.
Thank you, Lara.
You're very welcome.
I just want to thank you and also ask you, leave you with a question, whether or not you considered it, give another couple of lecture sessions at some point in the future. So that's my request.
Oh, yeah, this, given that I really feel like I only adequately and even that not very adequately talked about the first few lines of the sutra. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of space for a lot more exploration of this,
Yeah.
doing it
Yeah,
together.
it was
with
it was wonderful. It was wonderful, amazing. So
Oh,
more
thank
than adequate, perfect. So yeah, if you, I would love it. I think all of us, if you would think about giving when you can scheduling another couple of lectures. And I really enjoy kind of sort of just a lecture where we can just soak up all the work and that you've done
Yeah,
and
okay.
study on this.
Cool. Thank you. It's really like the magic is really it's in the text and the amazing commentaries that people have translated. It's incredible material to have to work with. And I love giving people an access point to it, for each of us to work with it. But thank you. Thank you for joining me.